Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome back to the next little video we are doing on the Odyssey. And last time we split up the second uh, the second part of the Odyssey into two videos because, as per usual, I spoke a little bit too long, or I kind of delved a little bit too long on the last two books. So what we're going to do now is finish up the second section of the Odyssey, which really only includes book 12 and also book, I believe it's 16 so far. So that will kind of close off the second of the three sections that we usually spend or that we usually focus on in the Odyssey. Now, last time we basically left off with Odysseus visiting the underworld and seeing Tiresias there and being given his quote unquote prophecy, which for our understanding, again, is representative of how he is gaining a new level of knowledge and a new kind of level of insight that he needed to get before he could return home. And you'll remember that Circe told him that he needed to do this if he was going to get home at all. And I think that opens up an interesting side note or side discussion about Circe's character that we hinted at last time. She at first is presented as a very dangerous and sort of temptress-like figure in the first book that she appears in. But as as he kind of presses her to be able to leave, and then they kind of have a little bit more interaction, she is the one who initially actually tells him that he needs to go see Tiresias in the underworld and get this prophecy so that he can understand what he needs to do in order to get home. And that right there kind of changes her character. She becomes much more of a helper, fundamentally. And that role is going to continue now into book 12. So she's a very interesting and what we call dynamic character. Dynamic, of course, means that something is changing or someone is changing. Dynamic means changing. So Circe is a dynamic character. She goes through a little bit of a change, or at least her motivations or her interests change and become a little bit more complex. They are not just a straightforward, like femme fatale, evil temptress sort of being. But she's also not entirely good, right? She definitely was kind of like a dangerous figure for Odysseus's men to mess around with. And now that Odysseus has returned essentially to her island on Aeaea, we will get a long description here of two things really. Number one, of her kind of helping him map out what his next stage of his journey is going to be. So she's actually going to say, hey, okay, you need to go this way, and this is what you're going to encounter along this road. And then we're also going to see in this book, particularly, a little bit of a description as to what happens when he goes out at sea and leaves her island. Now, again, remember that this and the past few books that we've been reading since book 9 are really all just a flashback. And that whole process or that whole frame of Odysseus sitting here and telling us what happened to him while he was at sea after he left Troy is going to end actually in this section. When we get to book 16, it will be done by book 16. So actually this book right here fundamentally is actually the last book that we have of the flashback of the frame narrative. So just understand that for your own understand comprehension of how the Odyssey is structured, right? So we had book kind of 1 through 8, 1 through 9, describing how Odysseus leaves Calypso's island and is found by a couple different, or by one different king who basically gives him shelter, gives him hospitality. While he is in that king's house, he spends book 9 through 12 discussing what actually happened to him. We get a flashback, we get all these interesting stories about the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, Circe, and the underworld, and now this passage we're going to read. And then once this is done, then we are going to be able to see, okay, now that he finishes his story, where does he go after he spends his time in that king's hall? And we'll get to that very soon. So let's begin by looking at this passage right here, this kind of intro little summary right here. It says, Odysseus and his men returned to Circe's island, While the men sleep, Circe takes Odysseus aside to hear about the underworld and to offer advice. It's an interesting little note about Greek mythology there. Apparently, gods or some gods, some beings are not permitted to actually go into the underworld. It's a place only reserved for either top level deities or beings who need to go there because they are dead, like, Hades, right? Of course, like he's the ruler down there. But it's implied that someone like Circe can't actually go down there, so she wants to sit and kind of learn what it's like. And we have a little bit of an echo of Odysseus's own character. Like he wants to learn things, he wants to understand more things about the world, about the way everything works. He's got that natural curiosity and wisdom about him. And Circe is here kind of mirroring that in him. So we see the same level of curiosity, or I shouldn't say the same level, but a similar curiosity in her. And keep that in mind, again, with the whole dynamic and interesting and more complex view of female characters in Homer's writing. We're going to see that again when we get back to Penelope and we get to see her. All right, so she wants to hear about this. So he talks to her, and then she tells him, hey, this is what your journey is going to be like from here out. This is what you need to do. So let's read. Odysseus says, Then said the lady Circe, So all those trials are now over. Listen with care to this now, and a god will arm your mind. Square in your ship's path are sirens, crying beauty to bewitch men coasting by. Woe to the innocent who hears that sound. He will not see his lady nor his children enjoy crowding about him home from the sea. The sirens will sing his mind away on their sweet meadow lolling. There are bones of dead men rotting in a pile beside them, and flayed skins shrivel around the spot. So we have the introduction of what Circe's first warning is. She says, as you're going to move forward, you're going to come across the sirens. Okay. And for the prompt here that you're being asked to write an answer to, it's telling you to kind of map out the journey. Okay. So it's a long, passage or a long section here where you're literally just being asked, all right, map out the journey. So the first stage on this journey homeward after leaving Aea is going to be the sirens. Now, what are sirens fundamentally? They are, as it says, crying, bewitching creatures. Now, depending on your mythological artistic interpretation. Sometimes that will be kind of mermaid-like figures, right? We usually see them depicted in artwork as something like mermaids, whereas in the older ways of depicting them, they were actually flying feminine kind of figures, which are a little bit more close to harpies and the furies, right? But these are a little bit more dangerous in some sense because they, of course, have that signature song that they sing. Which does what? Which I know you might have caught the kind of repetitive reference here. What happens as soon as they sing? It quote unquote sings his mind away, the man who listens to them, right? So you forget everything that you were trying to do, everything that you were kind of longing for, and you kind of just are obsessed with the song. Now, again, that is a reference to what Circe's potion does. That's a reference to what the lotus flower does, right? So this is again a an image of temptation. And what do the sirens do? They lull you in, and then you crash on their rocks, and you're not able to get home, and then they eat you essentially, or that you just die there on their shores. And what is the advice to do this, to get around this, rather? Circe, keep it mixed up. Circe says, steer wide, keep well to seaward, plug your oarsmen's ears with beeswax, kneaded soft. None of the rest should hear that song. But if you wish to listen, let the men tie you in the lugar, hand and foot, back to the mast, lashed to the mast, so that you may hear those harpies' thrilling voices. Shout as you will, begging to be untied. Your crew must only twist more line around you and keep their stroke up till the singers fade. All right. So how are we going to get around this? Because, of course, as you come close to the sirens, all of the men would hear it and they would be longing for it and we'd crash the ship fundamentally. So how do you avoid this? You need to plug their ears, totally just stop up the passages to even hear this thing. And it's interesting, she kind of predicts what she knows Odysseus will want to do, kind of again showing a little bit of intimacy or knowledge between the two of them. She at least understands his character. He would want to hear it. He would want to hear like what's this actually like? What's this temptation sound like? She says, "Yeah, fine. If you want to hear it, then just make sure you tie yourself down to the mast." Now, that introduces a change here with the sort of challenges we're going to face in Book 12. Because in the past, we had temptations and challenges, or I should say temptations, that were, if not partially resistible, then completely resistible. So, for example, the lotus flowers, you can say no. You can kind of avoid it a little bit. Circe, once again, you could say no. So there's these much more avoidable temptations. However, here we have now something that is unavoidable, something that you will be tempted by and it will draw you in. So it's almost like, we're getting more and more difficult temptations as we go through this journey. And this one apparently is completely unavoidable. She says, if you are going to listen to it, you must be tied down because you will not be able to resist the song. It will enchant you, it will completely thrill you and force you essentially to come into its temptation. Now, that's interesting because what Homer is implying here, if we want to again interpret this story as a metaphor for life, like all mythology is, what Homer is sort of implying here is that, guys and gals, there are in fact temptations in our lives that we cannot resist, that we at some point or another, we will fall prey to. Our willpower is not actually omnipotent. We cannot resist all temptations. There will be something that will slip through our willpower, or our willpower will fail at some point. And that's a really, I think, very wise insight from Homer and the Greeks is to kind of invent these monsters or have the insight to create these monsters that do override our will to some degree after a while. It shows, again, the vulnerability of human nature and the need for our own wisdom in this very dangerous world if we desire to quote unquote make it home towards our ultimate goals in life. So he needs to tie himself down. Okay. And she doesn't stop there. The bad news doesn't stop there because what then? What then? If you're able to kind of resist the sirens or avoid the sirens, what then? She says, one of two courses you may take, and you yourself must weigh them. I shall not plan the whole action for you now, but only tell you both. Ahead are beetling rocks and dark blue glancing amphitrite, surging roars around them. Prowling rocks and drifters, the gods in bliss have named them well. Not even a bird can pass them by. All right, so in other words, we have the road as it continues past the sirens. So we get the sirens, you're moving forward, and now there's two roads. The first road is where all these rocks and like kind of on what drifting, prowling rocks are just kind of like moving about or kind of just so tightly bound together you can't get through them. Okay, we can't sail through there. So what's the other road? Well, she goes on. The second course lies between headlands. One is a sharp mountain piercing the sky, with storm cloud round the peak, dissolving near, not in the brightest summer to show heaven's azure there, nor in the fall. So it's a strait is what she's basically describing. It's kind of another pathway, the next road, aside from that collection of rocks. The next path is, seaward bound, where there's a strait, where there's a place where you could sail between. And one of the points of land is an enormously tall mountain that stretches up to the clouds, up to the heavens. Okay. And what's so nasty about this this particular strait? No mortal man could scale it, nor so much as land there, not with 20 hands and feet. So sheer the cliffs are, as of polished stone. Okay, so in other words, if you land on one of the sides of that strait where you can, if you wanted to kind of land there and try to scale the mountain and try to get over it, you can't. It's just so like it's just a sheer mountain cliff. It's like, a complete drop, or it's just so smooth you wouldn't be able to kind of climb up it. It's very eerie. It's very kind of strange. It's almost otherworldly sort of mountainous structure. Midway that height, a cavern full of mist opens towards Erebus and evening. Skirting this in the Luger, great Odysseus, your master bowman shooting from the deck would come short of the cave mouth with his staff. But that is the den of Scylla, where she yaps abominably a newborn whelp's cry, though she is huge and monstrous. Okay, so halfway up this mountain is a cave, in the dark mists up there. And it's too high up for even the bowman to be able to shoot. And what is inside, of course, a monster named Scylla. And we're going to get more descriptions on Scylla if you haven't heard of her already. The first description, of course, is that she has like a whelp's cry, like a baby's cry, or like a baby calf's or animal's cry. That's what she sounds like, all right, even though she is, as it says, huge and monstrous. Well, what is she exactly? She says, God or man, no one could look on her in joy. Her legs, and there are 12, are like great tentacles unjointed, and upon her serpent necks are borne 6 heads like nightmares of ferocity, with triple serried rows of fangs and deep gullets of black death. Half her length, she sways her heads in the air outside her horrid cleft, hunting the sea around that promontory for dolphins, dogfish, or what bigger game thundering amphitrite feeds in thousands. Okay, so Scylla is apparently something akin to a sea monster. She has like 12 tentacles and then 6 huge heads with like serrated teeth inside and like gullets of death, like these huge like gaping mouths. Uh it's like this horrible kind of Lovecraftian sort of image of this otherworldly monster, this otherworldly sea monster that we can barely even comprehend, right? She's a nightmare, essentially. Okay. Now, the next passage. And no ship's company can claim to have passed her without loss and grief. She takes from every ship 1 man for every gullet. So she has 6 mouths, 6 gullets. She takes 6 men. No matter who passes by, she's going to grab 6, right? So her mouths are going to go swooping down, grab them, eat them. That's it. Okay. So this introduction of Scylla is quite horrific, right? So you have this kind of like nightmare image in front of you as Odysseus is hearing this. Now she continues, right? Because there's another side of that strait, right? One side of the strait has Scylla on it. What's the other side have? She says this. The opposite point seems more a tongue of land. You touch with a good bow shot at the narrows. A great wild fig, a shaggy mass of leaves, grows on it, and Charybdis lurks below to swallow down the dark sea tide. 3 times from dawn to dusk she spews it up and sucks it down again 3 times. A whirling maelstrom. If you come upon her, then the god who makes the earth tremble could not save you. No, hug the cliff of Scylla. Take your ship through the racing stroke. Better to mourn 6 men than lose them all and the ship too. So, this is the situation, the kind of infamous situation that he finds himself in. You take this road towards the Straits of Scylla and Charybdis. On one side is the mountain with Scylla on it, wherein you will lose 6 men. On the other side is a kind of like false piece of land where this maelstrom, this giant whirlpool, like sleeping whirlpool called Charybdis, lurks that will destroy everybody, that will just swallow your entire ship and all of its men. And so you have the option now. Okay, you want to get home, you want to make it onto the proper road towards Ithaca and the sea. You got to make it through the Straits of Scylla and Charybdis. So which side do you sail on? Do you sail on the side of Scylla, knowing you'll lose 6 people, or do you sail on the side of Charybdis, knowing you'll lose everyone? It's a trolley problem, right? In philosophy and ethics, right? Where we have the option of either letting 1 person die or letting 100 people die. It's that kind of a horrible situation. Now, the monsters here are presented to us. And of course, Odysseus does what all of us would probably do, and he tries to find a third way out. He tries to say that this can't actually be a proper dilemma, that there has to be a third option. So he says this. So her advice ran, but I faced her, saying, only instruct me, goddess, if you will. How, if possible, can I pass Charybdis or fight off Scylla when she raids my crew? So in other words, he's asking, okay, yeah, but like how can I fight her off? How can I avoid Charybdis? There has to be a way. There has to be some way to be able to get through this, right? So we see Odysseus here showing at least two or three really key features of his character. Number one is that innate kind of care that he has for his men and his desire to get them home along with himself. Now, again, if he were purely just working on him or focusing on himself, he wouldn't bother asking. He'd be like, okay, let's go Scylla. Let's just let a couple of them die and let's move on. And he's like, no, I don't want that to happen. I want to get all of them home if I can. So we see his care for his underlings, for his men, once again. We also see his, if you want, his kind of determination or his kind of fighting spirit here. He wants to be able to fight back against these things. He thinks that there has to be a way to fight back or to contend with them. And then we also see his a level of his cleverness. He's trying to say like, oh, there's got to be a way. Like, how do you solve this puzzle? How do you solve this kind of riddle of Scylla or Charybdis? Now, we as the audience, of course, I think Homer is kind of inviting us to do what? To kind of say like, oh, like how's he going to get out of this one? This is going to be interesting, right? This is kind of a tense moment. What is this? Must be like one of Odysseus's, great challenges. He has to get out of this. Well, she answers, right? Swiftly that loveliest goddess answered me. Must you have battle in your heart forever? The bloody toil of combat? Old contender, will you not yield to the immortal gods? That nightmare cannot die, being eternal evil itself. Horror and pain and chaos. There is no fighting her. No power can fight her. All that avails is flight. I love this passage because it's so unique in some sense in Greek mythology, and I'll tell you why. Greek mythology is not so like our more kind of religious, particularly Christian mythology or Christian imagery that we in conflict that we usually see in stories today, where there's a very kind of evident good and evident evil. Here we actually get, and Greek mythology usually is a little bit more gray or a little bit kind of on the margins and kind of tries to be a little bit amoral, if anything. Here we see a very clear definition of like, no, like Scylla is evil, is like something completely evil, is eternal evil, is something kind of like ethereally evil beyond our comprehension. It's this weird for Greek mythology. Um, Insertion of a clear villainous monster here, which is great. It's always fun to encounter those. And I love Cersei's description of this particular monster as being, as it says, eternal evil itself, horror and pain and chaos. So that's why I've referenced something like Lovecraft, right? It's like this kind of outer worldly, like otherworldly force of evil that this creature is. Well, you can't fight her, is what Cersei says. And she's like, you can't do it. There's no way to fight her. Okay. Now, usually in class, what I ask is for some kind of real world parallel. And we usually go into a deeper discussion here about monsters and what monsters are representative of. And we talked about that with Polyphemus. So if we take that same idea that monsters represent what? Represent something that we are in conflict with or that we are a fear in some sense in our real world or maybe even our society at times. What would Scylla essentially be? I think Scylla at the very least, in her role in this particular story as something that is fundamentally unstoppable and unavoidable, just about. She represents something that we can't avoid. She represents, an evil that we just couldn't avoid. Well, are there such evils in this world? Of course. My students immediately will point to death and something like death, something like disease, something like injury, something like mortality, like all these things we suffer from as being mortals. She kind of embodies all of that. They just can't get around them. So there is no answer for Odysseus except to pick one of these two options. Now, in kind of preparation for our introduction to tragedy after we finish the Odyssey, because we're going to do poetry and then Romeo and Juliet next, I usually point out here as a kind of quick side note, the Greeks really perfected, if not completely invented, the genre of tragedy as an art form. And one of the three major structures that tragedy will take, or kind of features within tragedy, is what we see right here, which is what? Where a character is given two options, is given a fork in the road that they must pick, and that they must choose one or the other way to go. And neither of the options is, in fact, a good option, right? We discussed that, I think, in brief in our couple of videos ago, talking about Orestes, the character who kills or is whose mother kills his father, and then he is tasked with getting justice for his father. But at the same time, the laws tell him, the laws of the land and the gods tell him, you can't kill your mother. So what do you do there? You either let your father die unavenged, that's terrible, or you kill your mother and avenge your father, but you've killed your mother. That's a crime right of itself. So there's no good option. Same thing here. You either go down Charybdis's lane or you go down Scylla's lane. You have two monsters to face. There is no third option. Okay. And that, of course, echoes what in life, how we sometimes are faced with situations where there is, in fact, no good option. The kind of the crude example of that always comes to mind every year is like a political election where you just don't like either candidate, or a lot of people don't really respect or like either candidate, and they'll think, oh, well, this is a choice between two evils. It's a choice between two, piles of crap. And it's like, well, yeah, that is tragedy. That's something that we encounter very clearly in our world and in our lives. And the Greeks tapped into that very, very well here. Okay, so what else does Circe say here? She says, lose headway there along the rock face while you break out arms, and she'll swoop over you. I fear once more, taking one man again for every gullet. In other words, yeah, you're going to lose 6 men no matter what you do to fight back. No, no, pull all your backs into it. Row on, invoke blind force that bore this scourge of men to keep her from a second strike against you. Then you will coast Thrinacia. Okay, so we get before that, she once again says, she encourages Odysseus to stick with Scylla. Okay, you'll lose 6. Better to lose 6 than lose them all. Okay, once you get past Scylla, then you will coast Thrinacia, the island where Helios's cattle graze, fine herds and flocks of goodly sheep. All right. Everyone's red flags should be kind of blaring, and freaking out in their heads right now. We heard this in book 1. We heard it warned again by Tiresias in the underworld in the last book. And now Circe is saying, yeah, once you get past Scylla, you're going to be on top of, or you're gonna land your boat in the land of Thrinacia, okay, where the herds of Helios are. The herds and flocks are 7 with 50 beasts on each. No lambs are dropped or calves, and these fat cattle never die. Okay, so that's interesting. They're kind of like immortal cattle, or sheep, if you want, that are nice and fat and are kept by the god or the titan, really, Helios. Immortal too, their cowherds are, their shepherds. I always get this wrong. Phaethusa and Lampetia, sweetly braided nymphs that divine Neaera bore to the overlord of high noon, Helios. Okay, so Helios has his immortal cattle, he has his nymphs, his daughters kind of tending the herds. These nymphs, their gentle mother bred and placed upon Thrinacia, the distant land, in care and flocks and cattle for their father. Now give those kine a wide berth. Keep your thoughts intent upon your course for home, and hard seafaring brings you all to Ithaca. Her language is once again echoing the language of Tiresias. I always imagine if someone ever actually made a really good, really, really faithful adaptation of the Odyssey, this voice, this kind of these repeating lines should be kind of echoed and said in the exact same tone and voice and sound, because that's kind of what Homer's doing. He's kind of having characters like Tiresias, Polyphemus, Circe, echo these lines again and again and again for Odysseus. Now, if you're able to avoid the sheep, in other words, you can make it to Ithaca. You'll be fine. But if you raid the beeves, I see destruction for ship and crew. Again, rough years then lie between you and your homecoming, alone and old, the one survivor, all companions lost. So again, the language is the same that Polyphemus said, and from what Polyphemus said, and from what Tiresias said, if you or your men eat those cattle you're not gonna get to home anywhere near as quickly as you should. Okay, and you're gonna see destruction for all of your crew, and you're gonna be the only one left there. So we have I should actually edit this here. There's a big break, and I cut out all the kind of space in between, but we basically see Odysseus get on with his journey. He leaves Circe and Aeaea, and he gets to the Straits of Scylla and Charybdis. Now, he says, "Friends, have we ever been in danger before this? More fearsome is it now than when the Cyclops penned us in his cave? What power he had! Did I not keep my nerve and use my wits to find a way out for us? Now I say by hook or a crook, I'm sorry, by hook or crook, this peril too shall be something we remember. Heads up, lads, we must obey the orders as I give them. Get the oar shafts in your hands and lay back hard on your benches. Hit these breaking seas." So he basically encourages his men onward. Like we're at the Straits of Scylla and Charybdis. I skipped a huge section there, and they're rowing through, and he is really, really strongly encouraging them to be able to get through. And he's telling them that we've been through worse. We can get through this. Attentive readers here will notice what? What is he not doing? He's not actually telling them what is ahead, and what's going to happen. He says, "But as I sent them on towards Scylla, I told them nothing, as they could do nothing. They would have dropped their oars again in panic to roll for cover under the decking. Circe's bidding against arms had slipped my mind, so I tried on my cuirass, and took up two heavy spears. Then made my way along to the foredeck, thinking to see her first from there, the monster of that gray rock, hoarding torment for my friends. I strained my eyes upon the cliffside, veiled in cloud, but nowhere could I catch sight of her. And all this time in travail, sobbing, gaining on the currents, we rowed into the strait, Scylla to port, and on our starboard beam, Charybdis, dire gorge of the salt sea tide. By heaven, when she vomited, all the sea was like a cauldron seething under intense fire when the mixture suddenly heaves and rises." Okay. So, a couple things for let's see if we go back really quickly. We can describe Scylla and Charybdis. We did that a little bit already. Number three, how does Odysseus want to fight Scylla first? What does his response teach us? Okay, we talked about that quite in detail. Number four, what is the final warning that Circe gives? It is of the Thrinacian cattle of Helios, right? And here, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped this entirely too. So yeah, at dawn, he and his men continue on their journey. Odysseus decides not to tell his men of the warning about the sirens. Decides to tell his men only of the warning against sirens, whom they will soon encounter. He is fairly sure that they can survive this peril if he keeps their spirits up. Suddenly, the wind stops. Okay, so as he's going through, approaching Scylla, he does not tell his men now about what Scylla is going to do. Why? He tells us because they will just completely abandon the mission. They will completely not be able to go through it. So again, another terrible dilemma. Do you tell them and then risk them almost certainly not wanting to go through, or do you just not tell them and say like, look, we're gonna be able to get through this. I just can't tell you what it is because if I did tell you, you would never get through and we would all be lost at sea forever and never get home. It's another one of those horrible, tragic dilemmas. So he doesn't tell them. Okay. Terrible, terrible situation. Charybdis is belching forth her water. It says here, the shot spume soared to the to the landside heights and fell like rain. But when she swallowed the sea water down, we saw the funnel of the maelstrom, heard the rock bellowing all around, and dark sand raging on the bottom far below. My men all balanced against the gloom. Our eyes were fixed upon the yawning mouth in fear of being devoured. Then Scylla made her strike, whisking six of my men from the ship. I happened to glance aft at the ship and oarsmen and caught sight of their arms and legs dangling overhead. Voices came down to me in anguish, calling my name for the last time. A man surf casting on a point of rock for bass or mackerel, whipping his long rod to drop the sinker, and the bait far out will hook a fish and rip it from the surface to dangle wriggling through the air. So these borne aloft in spasms toward the cliff. She ate them as they shrieked here, sorry, there, in her den, and in the dire grapple, reaching still for me, and deathly pity ran me through at that sight. Far the worst I ever suffered, questing the passes of the strange sea. Okay. So he sees his men get hauled up by the monster. He hears them being eaten alive, calling out his name for help. Horrible, horrible description there. Really quite horrible. You get that heroic or epic simile of what it's like when someone like yanks a fish out of the water, on a fishing rod. He says that's exactly what she did to my men. It's just this gross and kind of really um, haunting sort of image. So what effect does that have? Of course, well, that I think that just tells us how kind of like vulnerable and violent this whole scene is, how vulnerable the men are, and how violent this scene really should be. So again, a little bit of an R-rated PG-13 moment there um, from Homer. Now, that's when the close reading breaks, and we get to this longer little summary passage. Let's see what it says. Odysseus tries to persuade his men to bypass Thrinacia, the island of the sun god Helios, but they insist on landing. So notice what he tries to do. He's like, guys, let's just skip this. Let's just skip the Thrinacian islands. Just go. Let's just go through this. Why do we suspect they ignore him or that they don't listen to him and they want to land? Well, considering all that they just went through, right? Went through the sirens, they went through the chaos of Scylla and Charybdis, and they're like, we need to take a break. We need to kind of just sit and chill. They don't listen to him, and he has to kind of sit by as they, push him to say, all right, let's go. And it says, driven by hunger, they ignore his warnings not to feast on Helios's cattle. Okay. So there it is. Okay. There's their final mistake. They're driven by hunger, by probably fear and just general fatigue from this entire journey. And they commit this act of sacrilegious defilement and I think, yeah, sacrilege is the best word for it on this god's cattle. They completely disrespect the gods here. This disobedience angers the sun god who threatens to stop shining if payment is not made for the loss of his cattle. To appease Helios, Zeus sends down a thunderbolt to sink Odysseus's ship. So this is a rare moment, of course, where we see a god's direct intervention, right? To appease Helios, who's livid about what was just done. Zeus destroys Odysseus's men. He strikes the ship. Sorry, he strikes the ship directly with thunder and lightning, and it just completely explodes, and they all die except for Odysseus. And it says Odysseus alone survives. He eventually drifts to Ogygia or Ogygia, the home of Calypso, who keeps him on her island for 7 years. With this episode, Odysseus ends the telling of his tale to King Alcinous. Okay, so here we go. That is, in fact, how the story, or Odysseus' story, that he's telling to King Alcinous ends. This three-book flashback of his journey from Troy, it ends here. You made it past Scylla and Charybdis, but you got to Thrinacia, and your men just lost their self-control, lost their reverence for your warnings and the gods and all that kind of stuff. They eat the cattle. Zeus directly punishes them. They all die. Okay. So a couple things here. And that's, of course, when he ends up on Calypso's island for 7 years, where we found him at the beginning of book 5. So, number 7, how do you think Odysseus wants to bypass, or why do you think he wants to bypass it? Again, I think he's trying to kind of learn what he learned actually from, or practice what he learned from the Sirens and from the discussion of Scylla and Charybdis, which is that there's just some things you should avoid completely. And it's a good, again, piece of life advice from Homer where don't put yourself in the pathways of temptation. Okay. You should probably try to avoid them as much as possible. All right. And that will just make your life a little bit easier. Sure. Don't keep kind of testing yourself. And he thinks, yeah, let's just get rid of this. Let's get away from this thing. It doesn't work, of course. His men overruled him. Now, number 8, why are the men punished for their actions here? What was the great weakness and flaw in their characters? So I hinted at this in the last story or the last video, and I didn't discuss it. I'm not going to discuss it rather until now, where we have to analyze why it is that Homer chooses to put the men and the crew of Odysseus in this story and has them kind of go through these ridiculously like to us what seem are seemingly really stupid situations and stupid moves that they choose to take. First of all, just to address the first part of this question, why are they punished here? Well, they've committed an act of sacrilege. They've dishonored the gods in some profound way. And again, we can draw parallels to real life. Are there things that are sacred to us in our lives? Even if you are not religious, by the way, are there things that are sacred that hold an immense amount of worth to us? Yeah, I think everyone recognizes that there are intuitively, even if we're not being completely consistent with our beliefs, we still recognize that some things are sacred. For example, children, for example, people's lives, people's freedom, all this kind of stuff. These things that we as a culture will say, no, like you shouldn't mess with that sort of stuff. That's something kind of important. You really kind of if you do something evil to these figures or these kind of these sacred objects or these sacred things in our world and in our life, you'll be seen in quite a negative light. And a lot of our religions obviously echo that pretty profoundly, like not just this Greek religion we're seeing here, but even like, Christian, Jewish, Muslim religions, say the same thing. There are some things that are just sacred and you shouldn't mess with them. Like you don't walk into a church and like, take a dump on the altar. Like, that would be, defiling something sacred. That's kind of what we're doing here, except it's even worse, right? They're killing and eating the cattle of a god that are meant to be immortal and just be there forever, essentially. So you're doing something really quite awful. And why are you punished for that? Because, again, the punishment here is much more direct. And we're seeing the same thing that we see in the Old Testament, for example, when people um, deeply disrespect God or God's laws, right? There's usually some kind of severe punishment. I think of the Ark of the Covenant, right? Like if you, try to mess with God or the Old Testament or kind of mess with his people, something really kind of horrible might happen to you. Again, why is this? It's showing, at the very least, it's showing that if you act against the really deep fundamental powers of reality or truths of reality, you will have some serious consequences. You cannot behave that way and make it home as or make it towards any sort of good end in life. If you go through your life being completely irreverent and not caring about anything sacred, you're not going to have a good life, right? You are not going to anywhere. You're not going to in any way, shape, or form meet a good end, which is what we're seeing here. Okay. Now, the second part of the question, what was the great weakness and flaw in their character? I think that their great weakness and flaw was number one, or weaknesses and great flaws that they had was number one, that they were just not able to control themselves. They could not master themselves. They had no temperance as the proper word for that virtue. They had no self-control. And I think you could say kind of another underlying problem with them is that they had no really clear aim in their lives. And this is where I discussed, I mentioned this in the last video, I want to discuss it now, why Homer puts them in this story. I think they are meant to do one of two things, maybe one of three things. They're clearly meant to be negative exemplars for us. They are meant to be images of what we don't want to be, right? We don't want to be like these guys. We want to be like Odysseus. We want to be a little more wise. We want to be a little bit more self-controlled and tempered in order to get to what we want. Now, there are, like I said, maybe two or three ways of interpreting that my students have come up with. One way to interpret the role of Odysseus's men here is that is that Homer is trying to say that in the journey towards a happy ending in life, very few people will actually be able to get it. Okay, he's saying, like, look at all the people that left with Odysseus. Who makes it home? Just one. Okay, so he's basically kind of giving us a relatively pessimistic view of life, saying, if we're actually interpreting this story as a journey towards the kind of like fulfilling ending of life, many people will not make it there because they're too weak, because they make serious mistakes, because, just the gods or reality are kind of set against them in some way. Whatever you want to say, in some sense, at the end of the day, there's only going to be one victor. or a very few number of victors, right? Now that's kind of a scary thought, right? That's kind of a very serious warning. That kind of echoes Jesus of Nazareth's line in the New Testament, where he says, you know, the road to heaven and salvation is very narrow, and many people are falling off of it, right? It's kind of that same idea. Now, another way you can interpret this, and this is something my students came up with directly a couple of years ago, is that the men failed because they weren't really trying to get home, or they didn't have any clear direction in their lives. Because as we kind of track them through the past three books, they're kind of always like they're kind of like, you know, herding cats. They're always going this way, this way, this way. They're very much ruled by their passions. They're not ruled by any kind of higher level goals or thinking like Odysseus, or at least tries to be. So in some sense, they represent this principle or this truth, guys, that you get what you're aiming at. If you're not actually aiming at any sort of good higher goal, you're not going to get it. Okay. So, in other words, if you are not succeeding in life, this story and stories like, you know, Cain and Abel in the Bible are all kind of like telling you, well, is there some level to which you weren't actually trying to really get it? If you're not happy with, you know, the place you're ending up with in life, is there something you are were doing that is wrong? Now that's incredibly harsh, you know, as per a lot of, you know, these older texts are. And of course, I don't want that to be you know, taken to the extreme where if you have just some terrible luck happen to you, that, oh, you know, it's your fault. But I think it's more meant to be viewed at a deeper level of like, if you are not fully fulfilled with your life, or fully joyful with your life or the direction that's going, you played a role in that to some degree. Okay. So that's one thing, another way you can interpret Odysseus' men here. And the third way, I apologize, I mixed that up. The third way is essentially as negative exemplars, right? As people, or as Homer basically illustrating to us, look, this is what's going to happen, or this is what you don't want to be, right? This is not how men should behave. This is not how people should behave. And you want to be more like Odysseus. So they're kind of just there to contrast Odysseus so much. Okay. Number nine. Now that Odysseus finishes telling his story to King Alcinous, what overall kept him from getting home to Ithaca for the past 10 years? Okay, so yeah, he's been gone 10 years, right? So he left Troy, he had the 3 years, you know, at sea with all that craziness, and then he spent the next 7 years on the island with Calypso, and then he got sent off the island, and he got put on King Alcinous' island. And that's where he is right now, and where he just finishes his story. Why was he not able to get home? Interesting question. What kept him from getting home? Well, you could say, if you want to be totally kind of surface level, you could say, well, it was obviously the mistakes that he made. It was like the curse of Polyphemus is one of the major things there, right? Sure, that's the kind of easy plot description of why this happened to him. I think you could also say that he was not able to get home because he was not a fully developed character, a fully developed man. He had a lot of flaws that were keeping him from getting home. So again, what was it that caused the curse in the first place? It was his own arrogance. Okay. It was his own arrogance and and if you want to say this, lack of wisdom and lack of understanding that kept him from getting home. So in other words, the Odysseus that left Troy is a lot different than the Odysseus that is now leaving Alcinous's home. He is a lot wiser, understands a lot more. He has much more kind of clear-cut determination, right? He kind of has shed off all of the um, other desires that he has, all of the other weaknesses that he has, and he's like, okay, now he's a much more kind of imposing, very kind of determined figure. So I think that is one thing that kept him from getting home, is his own kind of flaws that he needed to overcome. Now that he has overcome them to a greater degree, he's able to kind of make it home. And I think that's where we see maybe the deeper, kind of more theological idea here, which is that the gods may have intended that the entire time. Keep that in mind, again, based on what's going to happen in the next couple of books. So fundamentally, what kept him away from Ithaca was his own arrogance and his own weakness of character, I think, and his own lack of understanding hence why he needed that prophecy. Okay. All right. So that was book 12. Now, he, as we're going to see, does make it home. King Alcinous is going to practice good hospitality, and he's going to get Odysseus back home safe and sound. Now, we need to remember, of course, the situation that is waiting for him at home. He is um, aware that there are suitors there, that the suitors are kind of besieging his home and not leaving his wife alone. They're just kind of eating all of his materials. They are, as we're going to see, abusing, raping his maids. They're mistreating his family, even. They're plotting to kill Telemachus, his son. So, do you really think that it's a safe place for him to be if Odysseus just kind of shows up? They're going to try to find a way to get rid of him. So, keep all that in the background. But again, aside from all that, he does make it home. And then the interesting plot points start to kind of really unfold here as we enter the third and final kind of section of the Odyssey. So let's read this. In Book 13 to 15, King Alcinous and his friends send Odysseus on his way home. Odysseus sleeps while the rowers bring him to Ithaca. When he awakens, he fails to recognize his homeland until Athena appears and tells him that she is indeed home. She disguises him as an old man so that he can surprise the suitors, and then urges him to visit his faithful swineherd Eumaeus. The swineherd welcomes the disguised Odysseus and tells him about what has been happening in Odysseus's home. Athena goes to Telemachus and tells him to return home. She warns him of the suitors' plot to kill him and advises him to stay with the swineherd for a night. Telemachus does as she bids. So Odysseus comes home. Athena, the goddess, steps in and disguises him, tells him to kind of go hang out with Eumaeus the swineherd, because of course, going back to your palace right now is not safe. There's a bunch of suitors there that would definitely want to kill you. In the meantime, Athena goes to Telemachus, who was out at sea looking for Odysseus. I think he was at Sparta at the particular time, and he had met Menelaus and Helen from the Trojan War. He'd been talking to them. Athena goes to Telemachus and says, "Hey, you should get home." And the suitors are planning to kill you, so you got to be careful when you get there. So go visit the swineherd for a little while. Well, what is Athena so obviously, I think, doing here? I think she is very clearly orchestrating the reunion between Odysseus and Telemachus. Because again, she is a patron, she's a protector of Odysseus and his family, and she wants this story to have a happy ending for him in some sense. And so she needs the father and the son to be reunited. Now, that's going to be really interesting, of course, because these two have not met since the day that Telemachus was born. And Telemachus, of course, throughout the story, was struggling with belief of whether or not his father was even alive, right? I think he always wanted to, very much to believe it, but of course, he never had full confirmation. And um, Menelaus and Helen, of course, say, your father was alive in Troy, but if he hasn't made home by now, he must be dead. So he's conflicted right now. We're going to see the reunion that is kind of an answer to all of that conflicted emotion. So let's read on. But there were two men in the mountain hut, Odysseus the swineherd. At first light, I'm sorry, Odysseus and the swineherd. At first light, blowing their fire up, they cooked their breakfast and sent their lads out, driving herds to root in the tall lumber. When Telemachus came, the wolvish troop of watchdogs fawned on him as he advanced. Odysseus heard them go, and heard the light crunch of man's footfall. He turned quickly to say, Eumaeus, here is one of your crew come back, or maybe another friend. The dogs are all out there snuffing belly down. Now, not one of them has growled. I can hear the footsteps. So the dogs come out and meet Telemachus. And that kind of introduces an interesting point that I would have us track, especially for this book, which is what is the relationship between Telemachus, who is the prince of this kingdom, the prince of this island, and the swineherd, and the guy who basically takes care of pigs, someone who's living out there in the slums. Well, the dogs recognize him. Now, I think that that stands to reason that if the dogs recognize you, then you must know the dogs and you must have a good relationship with the dogs and therefore the dog's master. And that is a quick kind of introduction to a point where we're going to see this, a point that we're going to see in the next couple of books, which is that the relationship between Odysseus and his family to the quote unquote underclass working people in Ithaca is a very close and very strong relationship and a very healthy relationship too. He doesn't talk down to them. He doesn't kind of belittle them or diminish them in any unnecessary level or degree. And so they are very faithful and loyal to him and his family, which is very unique, I would say, very interesting. For Homer to kind of put this in his work because of course we think our kind of like post-Marxist mentality is that the upper class always looks down on the lower class. Well, we don't actually see that in Ithaca. We see that no, there's definitely class distinctions, but there's respect there and there's kind of honor there, which we already saw actually between Odysseus and his crewmen for all of their faults and all of their shortcomings. He still tried to take care of them quite loyally. So Odysseus says, yeah, yeah, here's someone out there who must be one of your workers. But before he finished, his tall son stood at the door. The swineherd rose in surprise, letting a bowl and jug tumble from his fingers. Going forward, he kissed the young man's head, his shining eyes in both hands, while his own tears brimmed and fell. Think of a man whose dear and only son, born to him in exile, reared with labor, has lived 10 years abroad and now returned. How would that man embrace his son? Just so the herdsman clapped his arms around Telemachus and covered him with kisses, for he knew the lad had got away from death. Okay, so there's kind of a much more explicit depiction of the good relationship and the loving relationship between Odysseus, Odysseus's family, and the working class, if you want, of Ithaca. So the swineherd is like overjoyed to see Telemachus back home. He said, Light of my days, Telemachus, you made it back. When you took ship for Pylos, I never thought to see you here again. Come in, dear child, and let me feast my eyes. Here you are, home from distant places. How rarely, anyways, you visit us, your own men and your own woods and pastures. Always in the town, a man would think you loved the suitors' company, those dogs. Okay, so in other words, he's saying, yeah, I miss seeing you. I didn't see you so much. We would almost think that you prefer hanging out with those suitors, the dogs, those a-holes. And um, Telemachus answers him. Telemachus, with his clear candor, said, I am with you, uncle. Seen now, and uncle, of course, doesn't mean literal uncle. He's kind of using that as an endearing, affectionate phrase. I am with you, uncle. See now, I have come before I wanted to see you first, to hear from you if mother stayed at home, or if she married off to someone and Odysseus's bed left empty for some gloomy spider's weaving. In other words, he says, "Yeah, I'm coming to see you because I want to also kind of know what's the deal, what's going on at home. Did my mom marry off yet, or is she still there?" Gently, the forester replied to this. At home indeed your mother is, poor lady, still in the woman's hall. Her nights and days are wearied out with grieving. So he's saying, no, no, she's still there, grieving. Okay, grieving because Odysseus is not home yet, or Odysseus is perhaps gone or dead, she thinks. Stepping back, he took the bronze-shod lance, and the young prince entered the cabin over the worn door stone. Odysseus moved aside, yielding his couch, but from across the room Telemachus checked him. Friend, sit down. We'll find another chair in our own hut. Here is the man to make one. The swineherd, when the quiet man sank down, built a new pile of evergreens and fleeces, a couch for the dear son of great Odysseus, then gave them trenchers of good meat left over from the roast pork of yesterday, and heaped up willow baskets full of bread and mixed an ivy bowl of honey-hearted wine. Okay, so for number two, it's asking what might Odysseus quietly be doing in this scene, and you got to kind of visualize this. So you have the doorway, right, of this hut, and Odysseus and the swineherd are kind of sitting inside. Odysseus and Eumaeus. Telemachus comes in at the doorway and he kind of stops there and he's talking to Eumaeus. He doesn't actually see Odysseus there. He doesn't see the old man who is Odysseus in disguise. And when he comes in, Odysseus kind of like, gets up and he's like, hey, sit down here. And Telemachus jumps up and says, no, 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 don't move. Like, please, we'll get another seat for me. So what is Odysseus doing here kind of quietly? Why does he not speak? Why does he not speak up to his son? And I think there's a couple answers you could put here. So what he's obviously doing, I think, guys, is he's watching Telemachus. He's taking him in emotionally and also just kind of intellectually, I think. He's got to be just emotionally probably shocked to see now his son at the age of 20 standing in front of him. And go watch the scene what in Interstellar where I can't remember the guy's name, but the astronaut kind of sees his daughter now, who was like a little child, now speaking to him as kind of a fully grown woman, because he's been gone for so long, and that kind of like time loop, or that time jump in that movie. It's a beautiful scene, but it's exactly kind of what we're seeing here, where it's like Odysseus is kind of sitting there just in shock, almost looking at his fully grown 20-year-old son. And I think also what he's doing is just kind of analyzing him and trying to see what kind of a man has my son become. And to that point, I think that's one of the reasons why he kind of gives up his seat to his son. It's not just an act of kind of polite affection. It's actually kind of the opposite. It's the opposite because some of you would probably know when you walk into someone's house, and you're looking for a chair, do you expect an older person to give up their chair for you? No, no, absolutely not. No, you need to show reverence and respect towards the elders. You go find your own chair, or you give up your chair for someone older. That's kind of what Odysseus is doing here, I think. He's sort of almost testing Telemachus to be like, all right, like, please take a seat. And Telemachus, again, passes that kind of quiet test and is like, no, 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 please sit down. Like, we'll find another chair for me. So his son knows manners and honors and customs pretty well. Okay. So good. And they all sit down. Then he in turn sat down facing Odysseus. Their hands went out upon the meat and drink as they fell to, ridding themselves of hunger. So they sit down, they all eat together. So it says what? Telemachus sends the swineherd to let his mother know he has returned safely. Athena appears and urges Odysseus to let Telemachus know who he really is. Okay, so again, Odysseus is in disguise here. Telemachus doesn't know who it is. And as Eumaeus goes to inform Penelope that Telemachus is home, not Odysseus, right? So he's giving him we're just getting little bits of information here, right? So Eumaeus goes to tell her that her son's home. Athena shows up and she's like, hey, Odysseus, you should probably tell Telemachus who you really are. We should probably stop playing a game like this with him. And so he does so. Saying no more, she tipped her golden wand upon the man, making his cloak pure white and the knit tunic fresh around him. Lithe and young, she made him. Ruddy with sun, his jawline clean. The beard no longer grew upon his chin, and she withdrew when she had done. Okay, so she kind of like does like, the magical trick and she lifts the disguise off him, but she actually makes him look a little bit nicer. So he's actually looking kind of a little bit more well fed and kind of well kept than he did when he left Alcinous's kingdom. Then Lord Odysseus reappeared, and his son was thunderstruck, fear in his eyes. He looked down and away, as though it were a god, and whispered, stranger, you are no longer what you were just now. Your cloak is new, even your skin. You are one of the gods who rule the sweep of heaven. Be kind to us. We'll make you a fair oblation. The gifts of hammered gold. Have mercy on us. So, in other words, Telemachus shows us again that he not only is courteous towards elder people and people in his kingdom, but he's also very courteous towards the gods. He kind of immediately jumps down. He's like, "Oh my God!" He's like, "You literally, you must be a god, right? I'm so sorry. Like, let me make an offering to you. Have mercy on us, please." And notice the question here: why does Telemachus disbelieve Odysseus? What does he believe he actually is? He thinks he's a god, right? Because someone just transfigured right in front of him. He just changed shapes right in front of him. He thinks that this must be a god. So you're seeing a little bit of humility, I think, here from Telemachus. He's a little bit cautious and humble at the same time. However, the noble and enduring man, that is Odysseus, replied, no, God, why take me for a god? No, no, I am that father whom your boyhood lacked and suffered pain for lack of. I am he. So Cool little kind of joke. Of course, we don't want to compare mortals to gods in Greek mythology and Greek literature, right? So, as soon as Telemachus says, "Oh, he must be a god," this is like, "No, no, 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 don't call me that. Don't do that. That is going to piss off the gods." He says, "I am your father." Held back too long, the tears ran down his cheeks as he embraced his son. So Odysseus starts to cry, of course, and he hugs his son. Only Telemachus, uncomprehending, wild with incredulity, that is disbelief, cried out, "You cannot be my father, Odysseus. Meddling spirits have conceived this trick to twist the knife in me. No man of woman born could work these wonders by his own craft unless a god came into it, with ease to turn him young or old at will. I swear you were in rags and old, and here you stand like one of the immortals." In other words, like, there's no way you could be my father. You just change shapes. This has to be something that like the gods are doing just to kind of torment me, essentially. Odysseus brought his ranging mind to bear, it said. In other words, like Telemachus is kind of like almost like just tweaking out here. He's like, this just he just doesn't understand what's happening. He's freaking out. And Odysseus calmed him down. He's like, hold on. This is not princely to be swept away by wonder at your father's presence. No other Odysseus will ever come, for he and I are one, the same. His bitter fortune and his wanderings are mine. 20 years ago, I'm sorry, 20 years gone, and I am back again on my own island. I love this passage because it's such a nice what example of acceptance from Odysseus? He's saying, "No, I am Odysseus. I am your father. No one else of that name will come. All of Odysseus's life is mine. All of his fortune, all of his bitter wanderings are on this earth are mine," right? So he's basically kind of owning up to and kind of accepting his life and saying, "I am here. 20 years I've been gone, but I am back finally." Okay. So notice he's kind of not lamenting his life too much. He's not saying, he's not throwing a pity party. He's saying, "No, it's me. I own it all. All of that life was mine, and I am here back with you now." Then, throwing his arms around this marvel of a father, Telemachus began to weep. Salt tears rose from the wells of longing in both men, and cries burst from both as keen and fluttering as those of a great taloned hawk, whose nestling farmers take before they fly. So, in other words, like they're just weeping with each other. They're so happy that they are finally met again. So helpless they cried, pouring out tears, and might have gone on weeping so till sundown. Okay, so a couple things here. Um, for number four, what type of mood does Homer create here, and how does he accomplish this? It is a very kind of emotionally tense mood, I think, because we are really kind of looking forward to the reunion between Telemachus and Odysseus. But he also sprinkles in some misunderstandings. So there's the threat of misunderstandings that we're like, no, 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 like let's avoid the misunderstandings, please, and let's just get to this reunion where father and son finally are together again. And he gets there. And we have, again, this very what's called cathartic moment, or very kind of emotionally fulfilling moment where we have just this release of a lot of pent-up emotion and the longing that this boy had to see his father, the longing that this father had to finally see his son after 20 years. It's finally come. And they're able to just release their emotions completely in each other's arms. And it's very, very sweet. So it's very wholesome. It's very fulfilling and a very, very heartwarming kind of scene. And it also, if you want, is a somewhat unexpected or joyous scene as well for Telemachus because he didn't expect this at all. Like this is crazy. Like he got home thinking that like I my search for my father completely failed. I'm gonna go shack up with the swineherd for a little while. Surprise, your father's actually right there. It's a complete unexpected happy turn of events. Okay. So wonderful move by Homer there in terms of the narrative. I love it. Now, the last bit of summary here before we can wrap up this and look at that reflection. Telemachus lets Odysseus know that they face more than 100 suitors. Odysseus tells Telemachus to return home. He will follow, still disguised as the old man. And Telemachus must pretend not to know him. He must also lock away Odysseus's weapons and armor. So, what do we see here? We see Odysseus fully coming into his own character as a well-developed, wise tactician and good man here, because he's saying, okay, we need to deal with these suitors. We need to get them out of here. As per our discussion back with Tiresias in the underworld. Remember, we have to get rid of the suitors. He wants to get rid of the suitors too, but all of them need to be gone. We can't just, do this in a very kind of foolish and stupid way. We need to be quite tactful about this because there's 100 men inside there right now that want him dead and his son dead as well. So he puts on the disguise again so he can go into his home and start to come up with a plan to remove them. And that plan, at least, as we can see, has something to do with locking away all the weapons. Kind of a good practical idea. You want to make sure that your weapons are away where only you could get them. So that's the first, or maybe the second stage of Odysseus's plan. What is the full plan? We will see in the coming books. Okay. So that is the end of book 16. Really, really lovely book. It's a great emotional closure for this book. So let's see. I think now I would like to just briefly go over the reflections for you, or at least the questions for the reflections, and help you with these just a little bit. So for number one, explain how some of the challenges that Odysseus has faced on his journey can be seen as a metaphor for challenges and conflicts we face in our own lives. So, when looking through the books where we saw Circe all the way up until now, these challenges that Odysseus goes through, how can we again interpret them not as literal mythological stories, but as something that is representative of the own challenges that the same challenges we will go through in our lives as we are trying to journey towards a greater goal or a greater fulfillment of life. And I think the obvious examples of that, of course, are all the temptations that we face, all the opportunities that we have to go off the proper course, right? There's one right road towards what we're trying to achieve in life, and there's a lot of ways we can fall off of it. That's one of the things we see. We see the tragic dilemmas that face us there. We see the need to kind of journey inward and figure out our pathway forward, as we saw in the underworld. We see the need for mentorship that we see in Tiresias and Athena, right? We see these characters that are very much helping Odysseus move forward. We see the need for respect for something reverent and something higher, like with Helios's cattle, um, or just the gods in general. Okay, so we see a lot of different things, a lot of different challenges that we could face on our journey, our own journeys in life. Number two, you could ask, or you could talk about this one. Explain how Odysseus's heroism has been on display in these last books. What makes him so heroic and someone we should emulate? Well, we've definitely been talking about this for a while. We've been talking about his signature cleverness and his signature wisdom, but also his general courage and determination in chasing this goal that he wants to get home, and also his proper treatment of the people below him and his, I would say, love, if you want, of his men, and also his love and respect for his son as well, and his dedication to his wife, and his determination to rescue them and get his world and hers back. And then number three is the last option of what you could talk about here, which is why do you think the return of Odysseus to Telemachus is such a famous and beloved scene in classic literature? Well, it is. It is. It's one that, is very, very fulfilling and heartfelt that people seem to resonate quite a bit with. Obviously, if you have, if you have children, it really, really resonates quite well. But it also resonates pretty strongly if you are a child or just someone who could imagine yourself in a situation like this, seeing a parent that you thought was gone forever. And also for Telemachus's sake, seeing now essentially a very, very real means of saving both yourself and your mother's life and world, right? So this is like, wait a minute, for him, it's a complete turning point. It's like, wait, this whole nightmare of the suitors being here could be over soon. We could very seriously turn this whole thing around and have our happily ever after. So talk about that. Talk about one of those, whichever one you like, whichever one is the most interesting to you. Okay. So that's the end of the second section of the Odyssey that we're going to go over. Now, in the next video, I think we should be able to actually finish it up in one video. It's going to be the third part where we see Odysseus dealing with the suitors and trying to win his world back from them. So, thank you very much. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.